Chapter 1: The Birth of an Empire. How just one crisis destroyed America's orange tractor empire. This is the story of Allis-Chalmers, the Wisconsin manufacturing giant that built orange tractors, Hoover Dam turbines, and equipment for the Manhattan Project before a single agricultural downturn in the 1980s wiped out 17,000 jobs and erased an 84-year-old American icon. Chapter 7: The Last Tractor. On December 6, 1985, at 10:26 in the morning, the last tractor ever built at the Allis-Chalmers factory in West Allis, Wisconsin, rolled off the assembly line. It was a Model 6070, and about 100 workers gathered around it in a factory that had once employed 17,000 people. Someone brought a cake. Workers took photographs. A sign was taped to the tractor that read, "That's all, folks." Chapter 8: Bankruptcy and Demolition. 2 years later, the company filed for bankruptcy. By 1999, the last office closed for good. The factory that had built turbines for Hoover Dam, processed uranium for the atomic bomb, and produced nearly 100 tractor models was demolished piece by piece. Today the site is an office park, and most people working there have no idea what happened on that ground. This is how one American manufacturing empire collapsed in the span of a few catastrophic years. It started, improbably, with a foundry purchased at a sheriff's sale during the Civil War. Chapter 1: The Birth of an Empire. In 1861, Edward P. Allis, a Milwaukee tanning magnate, bought the bankrupt Reliance Works iron foundry at a sheriff's sale. He renamed it Edward P. Allis and Company, and the timing could not have been better. America was industrializing fast, and factories, mills, and cities all needed machinery someone had to build. Allis started with 75 employees, and within a few years employed over 1,500. By 1867, the company had outgrown its site and moved to Walker's Point. And in 1869, Allis bought his largest competitor, expanding into portable mills, boilers, and gearing. Through the 1870s and 1880s, the company grew into one of the largest machinery manufacturers in the country. When Edward Allis died in 1889, his company was internationally recognized as one of the world's largest producers of sawmills, flour mills, and steam engines. But the real transformation came in 1901, when 4 major machinery manufacturers merged into a single company: Edward P. Allis Company, Fraser and Chalmers of Chicago, Gates Iron Works, and the industrial division of Dixon Manufacturing. The result was Allis-Chalmers. In 1902, the newly merged company built an enormous factory west of Milwaukee in an area known as North Greenfield. The plant opened on 110 acres and quickly expanded past 160, and it was so central to the local economy that the town itself was renamed. North Greenfield became West Allis, a town named after a factory. Chapter 2: The Orange Revolution. Through the early 1900s, Allis-Chalmers built the heavy machinery that powered American expansion. But in 1912, the company reorganized, and a former brigadier general named Otto Falk took control with a vision nobody else shared. The future wasn't in steam and mining equipment, it was in agriculture. American farming was shifting from horses to gasoline tractors, and Falk believed Allis-Chalmers could dominate that market. In 1914, the company introduced its first farm tractors. They were heavy, expensive, and unreliable, and the division lost money from day one. Most executives considered it a mistake, but Falk refused to give up, and through the late 1910s and into the 1920s, the division kept bleeding cash while slowly building a small customer base. By the mid-1920s, pressure to shut the tractor division down was mounting, but Falk still refused. Instead, in 1926, he made a hire that would save not just the tractor line, but eventually the entire company. The man Falk hired was Harry Merritt, a marketer who understood farmers better than the men designing the tractors did. Many assumed his real job was to quietly liquidate the failing division. Instead, he rebuilt it. In 1928, Allis-Chalmers acquired the Monarch Tractor Company, adding crawler tractors to its lineup, and in 1929 it bought La Crosse Plow Works, giving farmers the implements they actually wanted. But the decision that would define the brand forever happened later that same year, on a business trip through California. Driving past fields of bright orange California poppies, Merritt had an idea. Farmers worked enormous fields and needed to spot their equipment from a distance, and orange would stand out against green crops and brown earth better than any other color. He ordered every Allis-Chalmers tractor repainted Persian orange, the closest match to those poppies. It sounds like a trivial decision, but Merritt understood branding in a way his competitors didn't, and the orange Allis-Chalmers tractor became one of the most recognizable pieces of equipment in American agriculture. Competitors followed. International Harvester switched to red in 1936, Minneapolis Moline went with Prairie Gold, John Deere stuck with green. But Allis-Chalmers owned orange, and when a farmer spotted one from a quarter mile away, they knew exactly what it was. That recognition built a kind of brand loyalty that went beyond ordinary business. Farmers who bought their first Allis-Chalmers in the 1930s often bought nothing else for the rest of their lives, and their sons inherited the preference. "Once you go orange, you never go back," farmers used to say, and they meant it. Despite the Great Depression, the tractor division grew through the 1930s, and by decade's end, Merritt had done what seemed impossible in 1926, turned a money-losing experiment into the profitable core of the company. Tractor profits were now subsidizing the rest of Allis-Chalmers. Then World War II arrived, and the company would prove it could build far more than farm equipment. Chapter 3: The War Machine. World War II turned the West Allis factory into an essential piece of the American war effort. Employment, under 10,000 in 1937, exploded past 20,000. The plant ran 3 shifts around the clock, building ship and aircraft engines, gun systems for destroyers, electrical controls for submarines, and tracked vehicles for ground forces. Before the war even began, the Public Works Administration had ordered massive hydraulic turbines from Allis-Chalmers for the Hoover Dam project. When Hoover Dam began powering Los Angeles and Southern California, Allis-Chalmers turbines were spinning inside it. But the most secretive work happened in a building most employees never entered. Allis-Chalmers was contracted to produce uranium processing and research equipment for the Manhattan Project. And the work was so classified that most workers had no idea what it was for. Military police guarded the section around the clock, and even metal shavings from the factory floor were secured at the end of every shift. It wasn't until after the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki that the workers who'd built the equipment understood what they'd been part of. Afterward, the building's lower levels were filled with cement rather than simply cleared, a measure showing how seriously the company treated the secrecy, even after it no longer mattered. Women filled thousands of manufacturing jobs as men enlisted, working lines that had been exclusively male before Pearl Harbor. The factory became a small city unto itself, with its own cafeterias, clinics, and fire department. When the war ended, employment settled around 15,000, and Allis-Chalmers had proven it could manufacture almost anything the country needed. The orange tractors were about to enter their golden age. Chapter 4: The Glory Years. In 1955, Allis-Chalmers acquired Gleaner Manufacturing, a leading maker of combine harvesters, giving the company instant strength in self-propelled combines. For years afterward, Gleaner sales generated nearly all of Allis-Chalmers' total profit, and silver Gleaner combines working alongside orange tractors became a familiar sight across American farmland. Then came 1957 and the D-Series, the culmination of everything Allis-Chalmers had learned about tractor design. The D17 alone would sell nearly 63,000 units over a decade. But the tractor that truly changed the industry was the D19, introduced in 1961, the first farm tractor in the industry to come with a factory-installed turbocharger as standard equipment. Turbocharging was still new and expensive in 1961, but Allis-Chalmers bet it could boost horsepower and fuel economy without a bigger engine, and they were right. The D19 delivered around 70 horsepower and, in official Nebraska tractor tests, outpulled naturally aspirated competitors while burning less fuel. More turbocharged models followed. The 19OXT went head-to-head with the legendary John Deere 4020, and farmers discovered they could push its injection pump well past factory rating at the cost of some blown powertrains. In 1963, the D21 became the first Allis-Chalmers tractor to exceed 100 horsepower, and once turbocharged, it climbed even higher, the most powerful and expensive tractor the company had ever built. By the 1960s, orange tractors were everywhere, on small family farms and massive commercial operations alike, and the loyalty they inspired ran deep. Grandfathers passed tractors down to grandsons, machines often still running 30 or 40 years later. At its peak, the West Allis complex sprawled across 160 acres with over 4 million square feet of workspace, 21 miles of internal railroad track, and a foundry capable of melting tens of thousands of tons of metal a year. Chapter 5: The Scandal and the Cracks. But beneath the success, a structural weakness was building. Allis-Chalmers was almost always the number 3 or 4 player in every market it competed in, behind John Deere and International Harvester in farm machinery, Caterpillar and Case in construction, Westinghouse and General Electric in heavy electrical equipment. Being perpetually 3rd or 4th meant thinner margins and no cushion against a downturn. In 1960, that vulnerability pushed the company toward a decision that would haunt it for decades. In 1960, federal investigators uncovered a price-fixing and bid-rigging conspiracy running through the heavy electrical equipment industry, a scheme that eventually swept up dozens of manufacturers, including Westinghouse, General Electric, and Allis-Chalmers. General Electric and Westinghouse initially fought the charges, while Allis-Chalmers, as one of the smaller defendants, entered a plea of no contest rather than risk a drawn-out trial it couldn't afford to fight. It avoided the word guilty, but the outcome was the same: a conviction, a fine, and a reputation in ruins. Historians later concluded the scheme wasn't born of greed so much as desperation. Allis-Chalmers was the smallest of the three giants, losing money in that division, and the price fixing was a foolish attempt to turn losses into profit. It failed, and the damage lingered. Through the 1960s, competition intensified everywhere. Kubota entered the American tractor market with cheaper machines, and in 1974, Allis-Chalmers formed a joint venture with Fiat, which took a 65% majority stake, making Allis-Chalmers a minority partner in its own construction division. In 1977, facing pressure from Kubota's compact diesels, Allis-Chalmers began importing Japanese-built Hinomoto tractors under its own name. Loyal customers noticed. For a company built on American manufacturing pride, rebranding foreign imports felt like a quiet betrayal. By the late 1970s, the company was struggling across every business line. Thin margins, mounting debt, relentless foreign competition. But the tractors were still rolling off the line in West Allis, and as long as they kept coming, there was hope. Then the 1980s arrived, and the ground gave way entirely. Chapter 6: The Farm Crisis Hits. The early 1980s brought a perfect storm to American agriculture. Interest rates made farm loans crushingly expensive, a strong dollar made American crops harder to sell overseas, and land values collapsed as thousands of family farms went under. When farmers are going broke, they aren't buying tractors, and for a company that depended on farm equipment more than its larger competitors, that was catastrophic. The losses tell the story. Allis-Chalmers lost money in 1981. It lost money again in 1982. By 1983, the losses had ballooned into the hundreds of millions. This wasn't a company slowing down, it was a company in freefall. Desperate for cash, it began selling off pieces of itself, including its lawn and garden division, Simplicity. It helped, but nowhere near enough. Then came 1985, the year everything came apart. In May, Allis-Chalmers sold its entire agricultural division, including the tractor brand and the profitable Gleaner combined business, to Kluckner Humboldt Deutz AG, a West German company known as Deutz. Deutz bought the product lines, the brand name, and the dealer network, but not the West Allis factory, and it didn't want the aging American workforce that had built these tractors for decades. It planned to move production to Germany, but agreed to let Allis-Chalmers build 3 final models at West Allis through the end of 1985, an arrangement historians later called little more than a farewell gesture to loyal customers. That same year, the Fiat joint venture ended when Fiat bought out Allis-Chalmers' remaining stake in construction equipment. At West Allis, the workforce that had once numbered 17,000 had dwindled to a few hundred. Entire buildings sat dark and empty, and the railroad tracks carried fewer and fewer loads as suppliers stopped shipping. Everyone at the plant knew exactly how this was going to end, and almost exactly when. Chapter 7: The Last Tractor. The final Allis-Chalmers tractor built at West Allis was a Model 6070, and on December 6, 1985, at 10:26 in the morning, it rolled off an assembly line that had once stretched 2 city blocks. About 100 workers gathered around it, all that remained of the thousands who had once filled that floor. Someone had brought a cake. Workers took photographs, wanting to document history even as it hurt to watch. Co-workers who'd stood on the same line for decades shook hands, some in tears. A sign was taped to the final tractor. "That's all, folks." It was darkly appropriate, because this wasn't only the end of production. It was the end of careers built over 30 or 40 years. The end of a belief that loyalty to a company meant something. The bitterness was justified. 5 months earlier, in July 1985, Allis-Chalmers had cut off its pension plan entirely, asking the federal government to absorb well over $100 million in liabilities it said it could no longer afford, with no severance and no extended insurance for workers who'd spent decades expecting a secure retirement. One worker, 58 years old with 36 years at the company, told a reporter he was grateful for his years there, but had no idea where to go next. What factory was hiring 58-year-old men? By the time the doors closed that afternoon, 84 years of tractor production at West Allis had ended. From the first experimental models in 1914 to that final 6070, Allis-Chalmers had built nearly 100 different tractor models. But none of that history mattered to the balance sheet. It was the end of the tractor line, though not quite the end of Allis-Chalmers itself. The company would linger for 14 more years, selling off what remained and slowly disappearing. Chapter 8. Bankruptcy and demolition. Allis-Chalmers limped along for 2 more years, selling divisions in a desperate attempt to survive. On June 29, 1987, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This was a company that had survived the Panic of 1857, the Civil War, 2 World Wars, and the Great Depression, and it could not survive the 1980s. The West Allis factory officially shut down in early 1989. Demolition had begun even earlier. In 1985, before the last tractor was built, part of the complex was razed for a shopping center. More demolition followed through the 1990s, carried out by a bankruptcy trust liquidating what was left. Some buildings came down quickly. Others still stand today, simply because the trust ran out of money first. On January 30th, 1999, the last Allis-Chalmers office in Milwaukee closed for good. 152 years after the Reliance Works foundry first opened, the company was completely finished. No manufacturing, no offices, no employees. Chapter 9. The Orange Legacy Today. The site where 17,000 workers once built orange tractors is called Summit Place, an office complex employing a fraction of what Allis-Chalmers once did. Most work in technology, business services, and healthcare, with no idea they're sitting on ground where the Manhattan Project once had a foothold. Other parcels became shopping centers and facilities for Milwaukee Area Technical College. The rail lines are gone, the foundry is gone, and almost every physical trace of Allis-Chalmers has been erased. Longtime residents still remember fathers and grandfathers who worked there and a factory whistle that once marked the rhythm of an entire town's day. But that generation is aging, and those memories are going with them. The town still carries the name Allis, but before long, few living there will know why. The Allis-Chalmers name didn't vanish entirely. In 1990, a management buyout of the Deutz Allis operation created AGCO Corporation, whose name stands for Allis Gleaner Company. For roughly a decade, AGCO built tractors under the AGCO Allis name, bringing back the Persian orange paint Merritt had chosen in 1929. But AGCO discontinued the name around 2001, folding it into a broader global portfolio. The orange tractor stopped being built for the second and final time. A GCO still exists today as a major agricultural equipment manufacturer, but the Allis-Chalmers name and paint belong to history now, kept alive mostly by collectors. A pristine D19 with its factory turbocharger can sell for $15,000 to $25,000, and a fully restored 190XT can bring $30,000 to $40,000 or more. Every year, enthusiasts gather for the Orange Spectacular, celebrating the brand's history with hundreds of tractors from early 1920s models to the last ones built in 1985. Owners trade parts and tell stories about the farmers who bought them new. Some inherited their tractors from grandfathers, others found one abandoned in a barn and spent years restoring it. Museums across the country, including the Smithsonian, display Allis-Chalmers equipment as examples of a period when American manufacturing led the world. This is the story of Allis-Chalmers. 84 years building the orange tractors that became icons of American farming, brought down not by one bad decision, but by a company already stretched too thin, meeting a crisis it had no cushion left to survive. Did your grandfather drive an Allis-Chalmers tractor? Is there one sitting in a barn somewhere waiting to be restored? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more stories of the American companies that built the world we live in and then vanished from it.